Welcome, everybody. My name's Ethan Zuckerman. You're listening to Reimagining the Internet, and this is our holiday special 2020. Reimagining the Internet is generally a pretty serious show. We bring on smart people to talk about the future of the Internet. We do half-hour-long, in-depth interviews about what's wrong with the Internet and how we might fix it. But we're getting really close to the end of a very, very challenging year, and we decided it was time for something a little bit different. So let me introduce you to two of my dear friends. First of all, rocking the mic from Cambridge, Massachusetts, Mike Sugarman, who is the producer of this here fine show and close collaborator on all sorts of different projects, including Reimagining the Internet. Hi, Mike.
Hey, Ethan. Thanks for having me on. It's good to be on the mic.
And then reaching out to Ann Arbor and the University of Michigan, we have Chand Rajendra-Nicolucci. Chand and I have been working together at the Knight First Amendment Center all semester long. We've been writing a series of blog posts mapping social media. We're starting to think about this as essentially a field guide to the different types of social media that's out there. Because Chand has had so much to do with my thinking this semester, we wanted to bring him in as well. Chand, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Ethan.
So we want to start with the basic logic of this show, which is that we all know that 2020 was a dumpster fire. Actually, Chand, jump in for half a second. Why do we refer to this year as a dumpster fire? When did we start talking about things as dumpster fires? Be our fact man here.
Yeah, so dumpster fire is kind of a term that came out of the sports commentary world. There's not an exact person that we can attribute it to, but around 2009, 2010, it started showing up in a lot of different radio shows, news articles. And specifically, there's one article about the Washington football team that described them as a quote dumpster fire, and that article went viral, and it kind of made the term really popular in sports. And as you know, today it's kind of spread throughout the culture. So.
Well, it is sort of wonderful. The dumpster fire was first applied to the Washington racial epithets, now the Washington football team, a team that continues to be a dumpster fire morally as well as from a sporting point of view. 2020, a dumpster fire of a year. Our goal here is to talk instead about the small number of things that actually made us happy about the internet this year. Believe it or not, we do this show not because we think the internet is awful and should be turned off, but because we actually think the internet is wonderful. And all three of us have been looking for our favorite things that happened on the internet this year. So I'm going to lead off. I think we're going to remember 2020 as the year of Zoom. I think, like many people who are listening to us, my last moment, face-to-face with large groups of people was around March 11th. And at that point, it was the last class that I taught at MIT. Half of the class showed up in my classroom, socially distanced. We were learning to do that even in March. The other half was on Zoom. And one of the things we talked about at that point in that class, which was called, of course, Fixing Social Media, was what creative things people were learning to do with Zoom. And my students, told me that they were doing things that ranged all the way from attending Zoom-based bar mitzvahs, Zoom-based Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. Someone pointed out that they're actually easier in some ways to be at meetings like that when you're on Zoom. My single favorite was someone who would set up Spotify and then have Zoom-based dance parties where everybody would be listening to the same feed. They would be sort of rocking out together. I think what I like so much about it is that Zoom became the room of requirement. Like in the Harry Potter books, it was the room that you could equip for any purpose you needed it for. And in some ways, it actually reminded me of some of those early days of social media where we didn't really know what these tools were for, and therefore we could use them whatever way we wanted to use them.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't think it was just Zoom, but I think video kind of generally kind of served that purpose. I know just kind of with my family and friends, we got into making TikToks, especially in the spring when we were all locked down and really bored. And my younger sister would force us all to learn the latest viral TikTok dance, and we'd record it. And then she'd show my grandparents over Zoom how to do it, and they'd try and do it. And it was just generally a great way to spend the time and also feel a little old.
Chand, what dances did she get you to do, and where can I find these?
I don't know if I know the exact names for them, but I'm definitely not telling you where you can watch them. So,
arguably, the biggest viral star of the year was TikTok's Nathan Apodaca of Idaho. You might remember him as the man who was longboarding down the side of the highway, drinking ocean spray cranberry juice, listening to Fleetwood Mac. It caught fire on TikTok, parodied by a ton of people, including Mick Fleetwood himself, drummer from Fleetwood Mac. It led to Ocean Spray sending Apodaca not just a lot of cranberry juice, but also a new pickup truck. I believe he was able to use that money to move out of his trailer and buy a house in Idaho. Just kind of a touching story from an incredibly chill individual.
It's got to have the best mood of anything this year. I mean, just that feeling of Fleetwood Mac, the longboard, the long slow curve, the smile on his face. The man washes potatoes for a living in Idaho Falls. It's just a beautiful sort of moment that kind of reminds you how beautiful little bits of life can be. I only wish that I were that chill when I was in front of a classroom.
Yeah, and that kind of ties into another form of TikTok that really was funny this year, and that was the Zoom class fail. So there are all these different videos of the issues that would come up when people had to go to class on Zoom. You know, just various weird noises emanating from people's rooms.
To turn your silence in. Wait a minute. It's not on mute. I hear music. Where's that music coming from? What are you doing? What in the world?
It kind of just goes to show, you know, moving all of our lives onto Zoom and digital tools created a lot of kind of funny fails, and it was funny to watch all that.
It's not always the students who fail. Of course, there's been a couple of really frustrating Zooms where you see like students going nuts because the teacher has muted everybody and then has, you know, her camera's gone off or she's gone on mute or something like that. My favorite was a letter sent by the principal of a school district to parents, reminding them that while their kid is on Zoom school, they should probably be wearing clothing if they're going to pass through the background of the Zoom room. That, you know, while it's fine to smoke a joint at home, perhaps not smoking one the size of a Cuban cigar while your child is trying to study. It really has been a moment where we've all had some insight into people's lives. I actually, you know, I think like a lot of parents, I was very worried about the rise of screen time in 2020. But I've got to tell you, my son is a devoted Minecraft player. He has he actually has two groups of half a dozen friends. Some are friends that he goes to school with virtually these days. Some are actually friends that he met through a friend of mine, a group of young women, all of whom he plays Minecraft with. And so he'll go into a Minecraft realm, he'll get on audio chat with the various different friends, and they coordinate these incredibly intricate building projects. They design raids on each other's castles. I have to say, despite the fact that it involves so much staring at screens, it actually looks a lot more healthy in terms of sociability than a lot of what I was doing at his age, which seemed to involve, you know, beating each other with sticks in the woods. But I was thrilled to see that it's not just my 11-year-old kid. We saw Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez take to Twitch and start playing Among Us on a live stream.
Disguised toast, aren't you the best
Guys,
at explaining stuff? Go ahead, explain the rules.
Don't want to. I really don't want to be imposter.
Ilhan, did you want to change your name first? Or are you
Please,
okay with it?
don't let me be imposter.
Now I do. Now I want to change.
So Among Us is basically a version of the game Werewolf, where you have to try to figure out who on a spaceship is an imposter, and you get to have meetings to try to vote them off. And my son Drew put me on this, and I figured, I'm pretty good at Werewolf, I'll be fine. I got kicked out of the airlock within like 15 seconds. Evidently, I was acting sus. But what's been incredible is sort of watching AOC jump in and play these games, and it's very, very clear that she is what she says she is, which is to say she is a young person deeply versed in internet culture. She is completely comfortable sort of gaming on Twitch. It turns out it may be the new political platform. It may be a place where we get real insight into people's lives, particularly at a moment where we're living our lives on the screen, and particularly on the stream.
Yeah, and everyone was really excited about something that happened all over the internet as we kind of adjusted to these new screen lives. It was the rise of music live streaming. One of the most prominent examples of this was DJ D-Nice. He ran the Club Quarantine live streams on his Instagram Live. Started off with a few hundred viewers, but within just a few weeks, he had over 100,000 each live stream, bringing on high-profile mainstream guests like Rihanna, Michelle Obama, hip-hop mogul Mark Zuckerberg.
But only because it was on Insta Live, right? Had he done it on Twitch, you never would have seen Zuckerberg.
That's right. But, and some of the most exciting live streaming happening was on Twitch, actually. As parties shut down in person around March, all of a sudden lots of dance parties moved to Amazon's Twitch streaming platform. Everything from small underground parties that usually happen in the basement of a bathhouse in Pittsburgh to really huge raves. And the phenomenon spread like wildfire. Chicago's experimental sound studios curated a live stream series called The Quarantine Concerts, which ended up being hosted by jazz and avant-garde nonprofits and clubs in just about every American city that you can name, running every single night, basically from April through June, raising over $100,000 in donations for performers who lost gigs and tours. And on top of that, it was just a lot of fun, especially in the early days of the pandemic when we didn't know what was going on. Getting on a live stream, watching some music, chatting with people you never met before. It was great.
It's definitely not the concert experience, but it can be really fun. One of the musicians I've seen, 2 or 3 dozen times in person is Robin Hitchcock, who is a wonderfully quirky singer-songwriter, sort of out of the Syd Barrett hallucinogenic style of stream of consciousness songwriting. And he and his partner Emma Swift have been performing weekly on StageIt. StageIt's a platform that I hadn't seen before this year, but it's actually kind of a lovely idea. You buy tokens for sort of 10 cents a piece. You have a suggested donation to see the show. It's usually suggested at $5. And then people tip after each song, and there's a live chat going on at the same time. For someone like Hitchcock, who, sort of tells stories between sets, takes crazy requests, it's kind of perfect. I mean, the way that you actually want to see this guy is feeling like he's sitting with you in your living room, and then you are literally sitting in your living room, you're airplaying it to your TV, and then you're giving him virtual tokens. It's this wonderful fine line between actually being lovely and utterly dystopian.
One of the most exciting things that's been happening on top of these live streams, where lots of donations were coming in, was this kind of mass flocking to the platform Bandcamp, where listeners can pay artists directly for their music. Right around the time the pandemic started, Bandcamp started waiving its own fees the first Friday of every month. So 100% of the money that someone paid for the album, minus the PayPal or credit card fees would go directly to the artist. So around the time that the protest movements spurred by the murder of George Floyd broke out, a group of people got together and made a big Google sheet listing every single Black musician they could find on Bandcamp, so that come the first Friday of the month, you could directly financially support Black people by buying their music. This turned into a website. You can visit it, blackbandcamp.info. It's a wonderful repository of just about every Black person on Bandcamp across the world. Bandcamp has gone on to share this website themselves. It's a really wonderful example, one, of the power of supporting other people's music with money, which means you can help them continue to make music they love, and two, actually finding a way to financially support and lift up our Black community members, which, hey, I'll tell you, in music basically means supporting the people who innovate every major type of music that we love. That's how it's been for the entire 20th century. That's how it is now. And it's exceedingly rare that the Black people who made this happen actually get the credit and the payment that they deserve. I think this has been a really wonderful thing.
Mike, I'm really glad you brought that up. We've seen a lot of movements online that are reacting to George Floyd, in part by trying to get people to support Black-owned businesses. We're seeing a lot of indices come up of Black-owned bookstores, other Black-owned small businesses, particularly as we're in the holiday season. Looking for those sites is a great way to go. It's also a nice moment to sort of shout out Bandcamp, which is trying very hard to be orders of magnitude less evil than some of the other music platforms out there. One of the guests I hope that we'll get on in the spring is my neighbor, Joe Holt, who actually wrote a good deal of the technical architecture for Bandcamp, who can talk a little bit about how that project came about. It was just a great year to look for music online. One of the things that I found myself coming back to again and again when I was feeling really down about 2020 was the Nandi Bushell story. I hope you guys saw this. Nandi Bushell is a 10-year-old drummer from Ipswich, England. She describes herself as an Anglo-Zulu drummer, and she just attacks the kit. She is a phenomenally talented player, period, not just for 10 or 11 years old. She's a really good player, and she has this wonderful habit of screaming when she sort of takes on a drum roll. And she took on Nirvana's In Bloom and plays this. And what's sort of wonderful about this is someone passed it on to Dave Grohl, who'd actually drummed on that track with Nirvana. He's not a social media guy, but it got passed to him by Butch Vig, the sort of famous producer. And then Bushell came around and did the Foo Fighters song Everlong, which in fact Grohl hadn't drummed on, but challenged him to a drum battle.
Dave Grohl, I challenge you to a drum-off.
And to his enormous credit, Dave Grohl came back and had a drum off with her playing the same song, and they've been challenging each other sort of back and forth. So it's this wonderful sight of this, super famous drummer and lead singer, this incredibly energetic Afro-British drummer. It's just, it's pure love. It's just been sort of a wonderful and beautiful thing to enjoy.
Yeah, and 2020, much like every year, is the year of teens on the internet. Teens, specifically teen K-pop fans, were also some of the most vocal and effective political actors of the summer of 2020. In June, they collectively tanked Trump's first rally since the pandemic started in Tulsa by reserving all of the seats in the arena, and resulting in a embarrassingly empty but probably much safer Trump rally on June 21st. Those same K-pop fans who kind of gather on Twitter and TikTok and Instagram around bands like BTS started infesting both QAnon adjacent and white supremacist adjacent hashtags, most notably the hashtag White Lives Matter, and basically just spamming them with so-called fan cams, or videos they edit focusing on their favorite K-pop performers, usually with a kind of glittery effect and close-ups on their faces. Were teens responsible for the suppression of a lot of misinformation and hate speech online this summer? Maybe, but at the very least, it's pretty fun watching Donald Trump get his just desserts at the hands of a bunch of disgruntled K-pop fans.
So the K-pop stan versus the Trump stan thing was wonderful. Part of what I loved about it is that much of the humor that came out of it is just sort of inexplicably funny. You find yourself laughing at it and sort of going, I have no idea why I am laughing at this, but I cannot stop laughing. Chand, what's something you couldn't stop laughing at in 2020?
Yeah, so there's this whole genre of YouTube videos where they'll take a movie and just speed it up in a consistent way based on like a word that's said in the movie or every step. So the particular video that really cracked me and my friends up was the entire Bee movie, but every time Bee is said, they speed up the video by 15%.
According to all known laws of aviation, there is no way that a bee should be able to fly. Its wings are too small to get its fat little body off the ground. The bee, of course, flies anyway, because bees don't care what humans think is impossible.
Well, and it feels like time is always accelerating. So maybe it's a deep metaphor for our existence in 2020. Mike, what's inexplicably funny and also a deep metaphor?
I loved the meme, everything is a cake. You may have seen a few months ago, Twitter and Instagram were full of these videos of a knife slicing into a crock, or a knife slicing into a planter, or a knife slicing into a big juicy eggplant. And inside each of those, it was always a cake. The cakes were baked by a Turkish baker who runs the Red Rose cake account. Her name is Tuba Geçkiel. She makes a lot of really cool creations, and she made a lot of very disturbingly accurate simulations of everyday objects. All of them were a cake. It led a lot of people on the internet this year to ask, is everything a cake? To be determined.
And certainly something we will be keeping our eyes on in 2021. Would the internet be better if everything were, in fact, a cake? I think the internet would be better in 2021 if we could get the person who is running the Steakum Twitter account to write more or less everything. I don't know if y'all have been following this, but the person, his name is Nathan Allerbach, who is managing the Steakum brand account. Steakums, if you do not know, are inexpensive frozen processed sandwich steaks. I will say, with no endorsement implied, that they are surprisingly delicious. But the Steakum Twitter feed has been this remarkably sort of literate commentary on social media, on the nature of reality, on how to fact check, on how to prevent misinformation. So you have Steakum on April 6, 2020, tweeting out, friendly reminder, in times of uncertainty and misinformation, anecdotes are not data. Good data is carefully measured and collected information based on a range of subject-dependent factors, including, but not limited to, controlled variables, meta-analysis, and randomization, which is the sort of thing that if you wrote in a paper for me, you'd probably get a good grade. When someone asked why Steakum was suddenly tweeting in the voice of a communications scholar, Steakum responded a few days later with, "We are just a frozen meat brand tweeting into the void, hoping to provoke thought, inspire unity, and relay useful information. We are not an expert in anything or some beef god. We are a company with a bottom line being run by people. Stay safe and be good to each other out there." And I have to say, I think that's basically my experience of 2020. We are all just frozen meat brands tweeting into the void.
Well, Steakum Twitter gave us some good things and some serious things, and I think maybe pivoting to something more serious that was good on the internet this year, the COVID tracking project, which started with a small team at The Atlantic, Robinson Meyer and Alexis Madrigal, who were trying to track COVID cases. It's now the leading authority on COVID data, and it grew to that kind of just through a classic internet story, through social media, through crowdsourcing. Now they have their own website. A bunch of volunteers help gather the data every day. Bunch of different news organizations use COVID tracking project. The government is referring to it. So it's just this really great example of how people can use the internet and social media to come together and achieve really cool things. And there's even somebody out in your neck of the woods, Ethan, Jessamine West, a librarian from Vermont, who's been really a great part of that project. And so, this was just something that reminded me, what these tools can be used for when we have a specific goal in mind and something that we're really trying to achieve.
It's sort of America at both its best and its worst, right? It's this wonderful example of people getting together and creating a source of research data that doesn't exist elsewhere. The flip side, of course, is it's completely crazy cakes that this information is not coming out from our federal government, and that a bunch of volunteers have to get together and sort of put it together. Mike, any sort of parting, good news on sort of internet business models and the sort of serious stuff that you and I are often paying attention to?
Yeah, I think it's a small thing, and I think it's fair from the, capital S solution. But Snapchat started setting aside $1 million a day that it pays to the users who create its most highly trafficked content. If your video shows up in Snapchat's spotlight section that day, you get a cut of their $1 million. And, I think it wouldn't be terrible to live in a world where instead of the big platforms making money off of, selling our data, if they kind of paid people for what they actually did to create value for those platforms. Does Snapchat still probably make money selling people's data? I'd be surprised if they didn't, but it's a step in the right direction, and I hope that this is one of the things that helps readjust our expectations of how value is created for these giant companies and what we can get out of it.
Yeah, and Mike, we're going to talk about platform cooperatives with Trevor Schultz coming up in a show, and Snapchat's not the first to do this. YouTube, of course, has been paying creators for quite some time, but in general, it is a rethinking of that relationship between content creators and the tools that they're using. And Chand, when we talk about YouTube Logic, which is a piece that we're going to have coming up soon, I know that you're going to want to talk a little bit about the ways in which the economies of YouTube make it a really unique sort of platform. One of the things that I honestly have been most pleased with in 2020 is kind of the pivot away from the illusion of neutrality. Platforms always like to tell us that they are neutral arbiters, they are not publishers, they are not deciding what goes on or what doesn't go on. And we finally really saw in 2020, mostly because of the utter explosion of misinformation, platforms starting to stand up and take some responsibility. It certainly came into focus with Trump's ongoing lies during, before, and certainly after the election, where he's claiming without evidence to have won. But it started quite a bit earlier. The Plandemic video, this really crazy cakes video in which a thoroughly discredited scientist is claiming that wearing a mask will make the virus worse. The platforms decided that this was so dangerous, and that because the CDC had explicitly put up different guidelines, that they would simply block it. And it seemed like once you had Google and Facebook getting comfortable with blocking that video, it led them down this path where they got increasingly comfortable blocking other sorts of misinformation. I don't think we're going to see that put back in the bottle. I think the platforms are going to continue moving in that direction, in part because the public is really demanding it. So that's one prediction for 2021. Chand, any predictions for what you think we will see, or what we'll be talking about when we do this roundup same time next year in what we hope is a much better year?
Well, I think Zoom is going to be an epithet next year. Once we move past this pandemic, I don't think anybody's going to voluntarily want to hop on a Zoom to talk to friends, family, coworkers. We're going to be all Zoomed out, and if you want to see me, I'll see you in person. But I think video calls are definitely going to take a back seat for a little while to good old fashioned in person interaction.
I can't wait for that to happen. I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm going to say that if 2020 was the year that we all started paying attention to Chinese social media through TikTok, 2021 is the rise of West African social media. I'm waiting for the Senegalese, the Ghanaians, the Nigerians in particular, to take their musical dominance and bring it up into social media dominance. I'm hoping that the Jollof Wars, the great cultural battle between Nigerians and Ghanaians over a very popular rice dish, which frankly is much, much better in Ghana than it is in Nigeria. I am hoping that we will all be taking sides in this war between now and 2021, and that we will all have strong, although probably ill-informed opinions about who makes the best jollof.
Yeah, my prediction for 2021, it's the hopeful one. It's maybe a little optimistic. I think at some point in 2021, we will see a picture of a party on Instagram and not be terrified for every single person showing it.
And we might even find ourselves wanting to be part of that party, which is something that I got to tell you right now at the end of 2020, none of us wants at all. Mike Sugarman, Chand Rajendra-Nicolucci, it's been such a pleasure working with both of you all year. Mike, there's not a chance we would have gotten this podcast off the ground without you. Chand, in general, I would be much, much less smart about social networks and all of these issues had we not had the chance to work together. I am grateful for both of you gentlemen and the work that we got to do in 2020, and I'm wishing both of you and all of our listeners a better 2021. Happy holidays from us at Reimagining the Internet. Thanks to everyone at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, which hosts the Institute for Digital Public Infrastructure. Thanks to the Knight First Amendment Institute at Columbia University for all of their help and support on this project. And thank you all for listening. Please tune in 2021, where we'll have some new great interviews and insights on how we can all reimagine the internet.
We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas.